Hello everybody, welcome to number 27. I'm Jack and I'm Italian of origin, so I've always had a bit of a soft spot for Fiat. However, if you've been following the company's fortunes over the last few years, it's been a bit of a sorry tale. By the beginning of the 70s, believe it or not, Fiat was actually the largest manufacturer for cars in Europe, dwarfing Volkswagen. However, fast forward to the late 80s and the story was quite different. It was down to just 9.8% market share. And if we go to 2021, just 1 year ago, it was down even further to just 3.8%. So what's been going wrong? Well, Fiat had a bit of a resurgence in the 1990s, and this coupe is an example of that. In this video, we're going to have a look at it a bit more close up, discuss it and drive it. And then later talk about why the fact that Fiat today isn't producing cars like this partly explains why it's doing so badly. The coupe came about because Pininfarina badly needed to raise production in its own factory, so they approached Fiat and pitched the idea of building a coupe on the Tipo platform. However, when it came to the exterior design, Fiat picked in-house rather than Pininfarina's own proposal. So as a result, the coupe has the interior done by Pininfarina, it is assembled by Pininfarina, but the exterior was done in-house by Chris Bangle. It is, I think, agreed that it is at very least controversial. When I first saw it, I wasn't really sure what to make of it, because part of me was just absolutely delighted that, as usual, the Italians had taken a risk and made something truly different. You would never get a car like this from the Germans. And there are some absolutely fantastic design elements. I love the way these lights like this are sort of bubbled, the headlights. And you have to remember, this is a car from 1993, that when it was first released. And things like that, details like that, were scarce at the time. Then you have that incredible back end with the Ferrari-like sort of cut out round rear lights. And these dramatic sort of cuts in the side of the car, a nice sort of bulbous sort of front wing clamshell there. But it has to be said that overall, I like it because it is different. I don't like it because I think it looks pretty. The coupe was built on the Tipo platform, so that means at the front it has McPherson struts, at the rear it has trailing arms, so it's not a super sophisticated setup, but it is at least all independent. The Alfa Romeo GTVs were built pretty much on the same platform, but I believe that at the rear they had a multi-link setup instead of the trailing arms. I have driven both, and I think that the GTVs are definitely sharper, but this is great, absolutely brilliant down a bumpy road, which this is. Now, there are a few different versions that came out originally. The first one had a naturally aspirated 2-litre from the, which was also used on the Integrale. That's about 150 horsepower, 145, and then there was a turbo version of that with about 200. But it really sort of came into its own when these 5-cylinder versions came out, like this one. Again, naturally aspirated with a bit more power, and then this, which had 220 horsepower. Now, at the time, it was the fastest front-wheel drive car out there. And you would think that with that amount of power and what was happening at the time, it would be a bit of a sketchy handler, but it had a limited slip diff, and it actually goes really well. It keeps understeer very much in check, and although I have read reviews which say that if you're really pushing on, it kind of falls apart a little bit. That hasn't been my experience of it. Perhaps I'm not pushing it hard enough, but to me it seems to go absolutely fine. If you go too hard into a corner, it just sort of benignly starts skidding around a little bit and pushing wide, but not too badly really, considering the amount of shove this engine pushes out. So from about 3,000 RPM it has go, and you can rev it through to 7,000, but it's almost more fun just to stay in a higher gear and just put your foot down, and you get that sort of turbo rubber band feeling like this. As the turbo comes in around 3.5, it just starts pulling and it feels like it's never going to stop. Now, the interiors were designed by Pininfarina, and although they are quite different, it's far less controversial than that exterior, and I think it has been a huge success. Now, it's quite common nowadays, or it has been since this, to get cars with the sort of body colour bits of the interior. In the old days, lots of cars came with sort of body painted panels inside, but the upper versions were covered with trim, so it was actually something that only the cheaper models had. This reintroduced it as a really nice visual feature, and depending on the colour of the car, this is a nice sort of canary yellow, it really works to lift the interior, which otherwise would probably be a little bit lacking. It's all alright, it feels, some of the plastics don't feel that bad at all, but this centre console is what lets it down a little bit. And in this particular car, it's gone all sticky, and it's had that junior Ferrari thing, because the Ferraris of the time also did that, where it just sort of starts to melt and scratch. But it's quite an easy solution. You can just sort of use, not thinners, but you can use some kind of solvents to clean it up and put it back, which is more or less what they do on the Ferraris. Something else to mention about the Coupe is that although it was incredibly distinctive, it's also a very practical car. There's loads of room, both at the front, but the back seats as well are pretty much usable. And although they have a little bit of a reputation for not being the most reliable things in the world, if they are looked after, they are really good. And they are pretty cheap to maintain. A normal service is £200, and even a cam belt service is only about £300. So definitely a usable everyday car. One thing that you do notice is that the steering circle is absolutely terrible, but there is a plus to that. The 20 valve versions, or the 5-cylinder versions, got a quicker steering rack, and it does make it a lot more fun. It's not the most feelsome system, but there's enough there so you know what's going on up at the front, and it's just quick enough to be fun. Now, what this road shows up as well is that it's a really bumpy road, and the ride on this is just brilliant. It handles the bump perfectly. On bigger things like road crests, it tends to bottom out, which I guess is the downside of that, but you can really keep up some momentum in this. Brakes are average, but they sort of do the job. Chuck it into the corner and the grip is just tenacious. It's really surprising how good this is. It's a lot of fun. I wonder, I haven't driven an actually aspirated sort of 5-cylinder version, but I wonder if that is actually going to be perhaps the better driver's car, because it will give the chassis a little bit less to worry about, and you can kind of concentrate on the fact that it's so nice and nimble, it rides really well, and you can sort of push it a little bit more. But for sure, putting your foot down in the higher gears around 3000 and just getting that relentless shove is also a lot of fun. Now, the 5-cylinder sounds a little bit more cultured than a 4-cylinder. I still don't think, some people really love them. I don't think it's absolutely incredible personally, but it is definitely a step up from a 4-cylinder. Now, I said earlier that this is a perfect example of what Fiat are getting wrong now. And I think one way of looking at it is to see that just going to a modern Fiat dealership, and what do you see? Well, you basically see a Panda, and you see a few variations, like deformed variations of the 500. So the range has sort of dwindled to almost nothing. If you go back to the early 90s and you go to a Fiat dealership, they had the 500 of the time, the 500, they had the Puntos, they had the Bravo, Brava, they had the Multipla, they had these, and they had the Barchetta. So like quite an interesting range, a full range of cars. And somehow or other, I don't know if it's through lack of investment, Fiat have just ended up with almost nothing. And what they had at the time, all these cars, they all sold relatively well. So I think that in a way the 500 saved Fiat, but it also hobbled it because it just didn't dare do anything else. The Coupé is definitely a Fiat I think to be proud of. It's a modern classic, accepted, it's great fun. The looks are controversial, but they are different. You know, it doesn't look like anything else on the road. And it's a real shame that Fiat seem to have just given up. I don't know what's going to happen now that they're part of Stellantis, but it's such a shame that they're no longer trying to make exciting cars. I know you have the 500 Abarths, which in their own way are quite fun, but that's almost all there is. The 124 was kind of like a little bit of a, well, it was an MX-5, which it's arguable whether it was actually worse than the MX-5 itself. I think it probably was. So it's just, and now they're no longer making that. So it's a real shame. Thank you everybody so much for watching. Thank you so much to Paddy, because he lent me the car for the day. I've been trundling around in it before doing the video, and it's just been nice to get to know it a bit better. And I really look forward to seeing you all for the next one. If you have a car that you want me to review, has to be something a little bit different, either maybe you modified it or it's an unusual car, then please get in touch with me and we'll see if we can arrange something. See you for the next one.